Hello and welcome to The Witch Source. I'm Whitney.
I'm Courtney.
And I'm Phoenix Rose.
And we are talking today about Grimoires and Book of Shadows. So,
Yeah. I know this is something that you wanted to talk about for a long time.
Yes, it is. Yes, it is. So, to start off, let's just state out there that a lot of things were taught word of mouth. And so, as far as finding old grimoires or Book of Shadows, they're difficult to be found because everything was word of mouth. But we have done our best to find what we can find and share what we can share. And then we will come back to around a conversation on the word of mouth and the traditionally how magic has been passed down. But some of the oldest writings and textbooks, per se, come from the Egyptian culture. So there are books and writings that the Egyptians used, amulets and such, and those date back to the 4th millennia BC. And some magical books were found from the late 3rd millennium BC up until the 5th century CE. So thousands of years old. And they also really had a big emphasis on secrecy. So even the Egyptians were very secret about what they kept and the information they had. But the books that were found often had things like laws, hymns, rituals, information on training priests and priestesses, their information on their deities. They also included astrology, geography, medicine, talking to the dead, spells, invocations of deities, doll magic, which I think we would associate today with kind of puppet magic, and cosmology. So, but what the Egyptians did, since they were such a central hub and they had several different cultures that would come through, they would also nitpick and pull from the many different cultures that would shuffle through their area because it was such a huge populated area and had a lot of travelers come through. So they did their own appropriation, I guess you could say, in their own way and recorded it even back then. So, and then about the 1st century AD, many of these books were destroyed, and especially if these books contained anything regarding divination or prophecy, because it made people nervous and they didn't like it. They didn't want people knowing and being able to predict or divine the future.
Right. Now, of course, there would be, the ceremonies on mummification in these grimoires also, huh?
Yeah, exactly. Rites of passage, spells to get them to the afterlife. And, the tombs were filled with, all the things that they would need to be able to make the passage through and gain entry to the other side. And a lot of sacred things. And their medicine was very much mixed with, their magical spiritual beliefs. It wasn't just modern medicine like we think about it today. There wasn't so much a separation. It was all very blended and also kept very secret.
Right.
So then you have the Crusades. And when the Crusades took place, they started to discover Arabic and Muslim magic. And these kinds of texts that were written down along with Spanish magic. And so then we started to see in Europe a blending of those along with Roman and Greek magical books and texts. And all of those often had very heavy Egyptian influence as well, with Egyptian being some of the oldest recording ones that people could put their hands on. So all of that eventually mixed and mingled and made its way to Europe. And it got also blended with the German and Celtic cultures. So, and then you have early Christians, and they also have their own mix of Jewish and Muslim magic as well. And that still lives on today. They have, their forms of magic and how they work it, and they have their textbooks. So a lot of the stuff that ended up making its way to Europe and some of these textbooks that we ended up with have a big collaboration of all of these pieces and all of these mixings and all of these cultures. And then you had people that started these secret societies to pass along this magic. And that's when we started to see some of these textbooks come about, but it was still very much secret and word of mouth. Because if somebody had the textbook, they didn't want to lose the textbook, and they didn't really want to share the textbooks that they had gotten their hands on. So, it went back to word of mouth, things not being written down so much.
Right. Or these books only being passed down in families and stuff like that. And that's where you
Right.
get a lot of these. I was a born witch because they have a family grimoire, or they have a family history of this sort.
Exactly. And people started to kind of shy away from, recording these things. And if you were lucky to have a book, it was kept highly secret. It was not shared. It was not known. So I did come across two known 15th century manuscripts on magical books, but they're more or less manuscripts. So one old one that's known, it doesn't actually have a title. It's just, it's a magical book on running a household. And it comes from, I'm going to try not to slaughter this, Wolfstern Castle in the Tyrol. So just in case anybody wants to try to look this up and find more on it, it is Wolfsthurn Castle in the Tyrol, Tyorl. And it deals a lot with natural magic. So working with the elements, planting, healing, but it really was how to incorporate elemental magic with running a household. So that's one old manuscript that has survived. Another manuscript that has survived is in Munich, and it apparently is very sinister and contains a bunch of nasty conjurings that historians believe were actually written by underground clergymen. And the thought process is that these writings were discovered, and it was kind of the start of the Inquisition, of not only witches, but books, because they then started to search and seek out books to put on trial, as well as witches. So books were being burned at that time just as much as witches were being burned.
That's interesting.
Right. So it wasn't just, let's get rid of, these people who have these things and are practicing, but let's get rid of all this material, which is why we don't have very much surviving material at this point either. And there was one mention of a woman. So in the 17th century, there's a mention of a woman. Her name is Laura Malapero. It's Malipero. And it was during the Inquisition that they found her with a copy of the Key of Solomon.
Yeah.
What happened was they also found where she was handwriting the spells in another book and copying these Keys of Solomon over. So that started the idea of, okay, not only are these books, such as the Key of Solomon, out there, but now they're being copied. See, prior to that, a lot of people were not able to read and write.
Right.
So again, you go back to the word of mouth being the way that information was passed.
Right.
But then you reach this time where it's becoming more, reading and writing is becoming more known and something that people do. And then there was this fear of, okay, now this stuff is even more accessible and able to be copied and written and shared.
Right. And that's kind of, what I found in my research was that, way back when reading and writing was pretty much reserved for nobility, or the clergy. And a lot of times it was the clergy that were copying and writing books, mainly being the Bible.
Right.
So, pretty much your tradition had to be an oral tradition, and, widespread or reading and writing really didn't become more widespread until, the Gutenberg press, and they were able to start mass producing the Bible, and, distributing that to the people. And that spread about, even though it was expensive, it was still pretty expensive to get your hands on one, but
yeah, to be able to print
but
anything.
right, exactly. So, but that brings about my favorite saying, because when it comes to grimoires, Book of Shadows, or anything else, you're all about keeping one where, what is my philosophy? Do you
Don't
know
write
it?
down
Do you
today
remember
what
it?
will get you burned tomorrow.
Yep. Don't write today what could get you burnt tomorrow. So, I mean, that was kind of the philosophy back then as well.
Right. True. Very true. So,
I mean, you really wouldn't want to be caught. I mean, especially the height of the Inquisition. Would you
right.
really want to be caught with any type of manuscript? I know those were some scary times.
Well, and from from what I was finding, this particular instance where they found this woman with this Key of Solomon, and she was copying this information down for herself. She was copying it down in a black book, and so
Oh,
it's that kind of started this idea that your Book of Shadows has to be a black book. And that's not necessarily true. Like, the more research you do into magical books, it can be any color. There is no right or wrong. It started with this Inquisition, and they started saying, okay, this witch is writing this in a black book. So we need to start looking for black books with these handwritten spells in it. And we need to know what to call this thing. So they decided to call this thing a grimoire. So it wasn't really until the
right.
Inquisition that it was given this, copying of spells, this book, this supposed black book that would contain these magical writings. That thought didn't really come around until the Inquisition. And then what also happened is we started to have, as they're trying to come up with ways to find witches and persecute witches, they needed terms. They needed an understanding of things that they didn't have an understanding of. So they started to come up with terms and phrases, and that's where we today still have a lot of our witchy terminology comes from that. So things like
Right.
grimoire, familiar, that came out of the Inquisition. Warlock was something that came out of the Inquisition. So some of the terms have, over time started to fall out of favor. But then for some witches, it was like, okay, well, we didn't have this vocabulary before. We didn't have particular names for these things before, but now you've given it to us, and okay, we kind of like it. We're going to keep using it.
Right.
So some of them did
Well,
survive.
in your research, was it the Inquisitioners who were giving these things names, or was it those being accused? Because in order to get out of trouble, sometimes they would name other people,
Mm-hmm.
hoping for a less harsh of punishment. Was it one of those, well, I saw Betty down the street and she had a familiar, and then they're like, oh, what is this familiar you speak of?
I
So,
think I
what?
think it was a blending, actually. Yes, that's a good point. I think it was a blending because I actually read at some point that the word Sabbat, like we use
Uh-huh.
today in the Wheel of the Year, actually came out of somebody being tortured, and they said they had attended a Sabbat, and so that's where that phrase came from. So I definitely think it's a blending. I think that they were coming up with, ways to be able to identify and having terminology for what they were searching for. But yeah, definitely, I think in a hope to end the torture that was happening, yeah, they'll say anything. They'll come up with anything. So definitely a blending. I would definitely agree with that for sure.
Yeah, I could see that.
And it's
So,
like, how
So what
many
else
of
do we
these
have?
people were really witches that were being tortured? And,
right.
like you say, they
Yeah,
were just words that they were being, they were throwing anything out there.
exactly. They were doing anything, probably, I think a large majority of them were not witches or not what we consider witches today. Some of them were just simple midwives or herbalists.
Right.
And, they were getting accused as well. And, but yeah, I think it was anything to try to make it end. So, but that's where a lot of the words and the terms, and I think, come from. What did you find reporting on Grimoire? Because I think it has a tie in here.
All right. Well, so
We had a cat.
sorry, we had a cat fest there for a second. All right. So I've got that. So the definition of grimoire is that it is a spell book that contains symbols, incantations, charms, and instructions for invocations and the making of amulets.
Mm-hmm.
So I have the term grimoire originates from the French word, like I said, grimoire. It's a French word, however you pronounce that, which means a book written in Latin. And it was in the 18th century, which is around the time of the Inquisition. The word grimoire came to be associated with the book of magic, with books of magic. So you explain the process of how that came to be. So that's neat knowing that you found that out. Many grimoires are from the medieval period onward, were the records of rituals, experiments, and discoveries, and even from. If any of y'all have animals, you know the pain over here. You're trying to do something, and your animals just want to go crazy on you.
For once, mine are being
Right.
Right. Normally we have Rose's cats in the background saying hello.
So pretty much from the medieval period onward, grimoires were records of rituals, experiments, and discoveries by individuals like John Dee. John Dee was, a very popular magician, scientist from the Elizabethan period. And these people did experiments to find a common ground between science, religion, and magic.
Right.
So there was a lot of the intertwining, trying to find the commonality, and while they would write it down, it was still really dangerous at that point in time, because you didn't want to step too far over the lines to be termed a witch.
Right. By staying on the scientific side of things, you're a little bit safer.
Right.
Correct. Right. But then on the definition that I found on Book of Shadows is that it is a book containing religious texts and instructions for magical rituals found within the neo-pagan religion of Wicca, which was founded by Gerald Gardner. And it should be noted that Gerald Gardner created the first Book of Shadows, which was used in his Bricket Wood Coven and all covens that he founded. Since its conception in the 1940s, it has made its way into pagan practices and paths. Early practitioners of Wicca would organize themselves into covens and share a communal book of shadows. And this Book of Shadows would contain the coven's spells and rituals, but most Wiccans today tend to find themselves as solitary practitioners. And so they've pretty much said, that they've encouraged every witch to keep her own, or their own, not her, but their own Book of Shadows. So then, trying to find the commonality or differences between the two, is that a grimoire is pretty much general knowledge, in that it's a book holding information that all witches can use, and that it can be passed down and used by any witch. Whereas a Book of Shadows, however, is a shadow of its owner, dealing with its owner's personal path, beliefs, spells, and rituals, and is not to be shared with anyone unless they consent to it. And then kind of touching on some of the information that you had discussed on ancient texts, some what historians consider, old grimoires that were popular for their day. The first one is the 6th and 7th Book of Moses. That was considered a grimoire, and it was first circulated in the 18th century. It spread from Germany to America. And then the interesting thing is that it's the founding texts for Rastafarianism and other movements in West Africa. So, I mean, I was not aware of that. And I'm kind of wanting to look up the 6th and 7th Book of Moses to find out what's going on there.
Right.
Well, and I have on that Noah learned how to make the ark from this book that was given to Adam by the angel Raziel.
And wow. Oh, yeah. Well, Raphael, Rastafarianism, I can see that now.
Yeah, and that it actually stayed on the ark with him, and that it was later in the 13th century translated. Emerged in the 13th century, the translation attributed to Eleazar of Worms. And by the 15th century, there were several kinds of magical books floating around Europe that mostly included magical beliefs and practices from that book. So then people took it and started to branch off of it.
Branch off from that. That's cool. Mm-hmm. So then the other one I found was the Clavicule of Solomon, or the Key of Solomon. And it is considered to be the granddaddy of grimoires, being written by King Solomon and it was well established since biblical times, but it was still extremely popular in the 15th century among scientists and clergy. So I think that kind of ties in with what you had said about manuscripts being found by clergy members and, grimoires. So that was neat, seeing the ties in together.
Yeah, and you can actually still find the Key of Solomon. I mean, you can still find it in print. It's very intricate. There's a lot of keys there, and a lot of it is, in different. You use it. It's in a different language. So then, when you're speaking and you are trying to do these spells or these incantations, and you're calling up these things, to me, there's always that little bit of, one, am I saying it right? And two, what exactly am I calling on? And what am I calling on if I'm not saying it right?
Right.
Like, I don't want to have a oops moment because I called in the wrong thing.
I can so see that go wrong.
Right.
Where's my unicorn? Why did I get a devil dog instead?
I think I pronounced that wrong. Oh no. Now how do I undo it?
Then the last book I found was the book of Honorius, and that was pretty much second only to the Clavicule of Solomon or the Key of Solomon in medieval times. So, I mean, it was an extremely popular book. And, according to historians, there's no record of there being an actual person, the actual person associated with writing the book, Honorius. But the book gives instructions on receiving visions from God.
Your audio is a little hard to hear.
Okay. Is that better?
A little bit, not much.
Is that better?
No.
I'm so sorry. No? Okay, talk amongst yourself. We'll come back.
Okay. Well, hopefully at some point, I want to hear what this last book was because it's quite interesting. So hopefully your audio kicks back in at some point. Let's see. I wanted to mention, we had talked about Gardner for a minute and the idea of him bringing in and the term Book of Shadows. And his stuff, there was a group of people associated with Gardner. There was also Doreen Vallant, and she first discovered the term was borrowed from an article published in the Occult Observer in 1949, and it was about some Sanskrit manual of the name that taught a person's destiny from the length of their shadow. So then Gardner's book, which was originally titled Ye Book of Ye Art Magical, went through various stages of reproduction before his groundbreaking work of High Magic Aid was published in 1949. So then portions of High Magic's Aid were taken from his other book, Ye Book of Ye Art Magical. And when the witchcraft laws in England were repealed in 1951, High Magic's Aid became the first how-to magical book on witchcraft available to the general public in modern times. And so that's kind of how we get to the push of having this new term of Book of Shadows out into the world.
So it's interesting. You brought up Doreen.
Mm-hmm.
What was that? Doreen. So in my research, when she was going through and reading Gardner's Book of Shadows, she actually found that he had plagiarized a lot of stuff from Aleister Crowley.
I was but just about to ask about him.
Mm-hmm. Yep. A lot of the stuff had been plagiarized by other people. So she said, we can't release this. So it went through the revision while some, I can't remember what the poem was, but they decided to leave the poem in as is.
What were you going to say, Rose, about Aleister Crowley?
Oh, it's like anytime I've kind of like looked up witchcraft and everything like that, that's like one of the first names you find on Google. Like, because it's always like, if you say witchcraft, you find Wicca, of course. And it's like, right. I'm not looking for Wicca, but it's like, oh. And then, of course, because I've seen that Good Omens, I'm like, Crowley. It's like, oh, hey. So I was just about to ask about that because he also had an influence on modern day Wicca and the religion and everything like that and helping forming it and everything like that.
Yeah, there was heavy influence there.
Aleister Crowley could...
Go ahead.
I was going to say Aleister Crowley could almost have an entire podcast just dedicated to himself because he was extremely groundbreaking in just his, what he contributed. I mean, Ozzy has an entire song about him, Mr. Crowley. And he's referring to Aleister Crowley. Led Zeppelin, I think the Beatles, they all contributed songs to Aleister Crowley. So, I mean, he was very influential even in, just the pop media, influences of the time.
Yeah, he definitely could have a whole section all on himself because he did do a lot of work. He also did a lot of moving in and out of different magical circles and systems that were around in the day and collecting He was very much a collector of many
Right.
different types of magic, whether that was, Egyptian, Greek, Roman. Like he really studied and went through many different societies, magical societies, gathering and gaining. And I think a few times got kicked out of several. Um, so, he definitely could have a podcast all on his own. But yes, a lot of what he did ended up um, being heavy influenced on Gardner and many of them, and what ended up becoming Wicca, which was, the driving kind of force of witchcraft coming back into play, before people were like, wait a minute, I think there's something more to this. There's pieces missing,
Well,
and there's more to this than what Wicca is touching on. So, and then you had the branching out of witches just wanting to be witches.
Right.
well, and an interesting fact. So Wicca, England, the UK actually considers it the only religion that they have contributed and given to the world, because so many religions originated other places. And, Gardner pulled heavily on, traditional craft at the time. But I always say, he made it palatable for the masses by putting the restraints, such as the Wiccan Rede.
Right.
He kind of brought it in line with what would make it acceptable to other people. And that is, and like I said, England considers it, it's their contribution to the world.
Right. Yeah, and you're right. He really did try to make it where society would accept it, and be okay with
Mm-hmm.
it, with adding, rules such as and harm none, and,
Making it a religion, make it an organized religion, putting
exactly.
rules and
Right.
restrictions and
Right. And then I think, as it's made its way through, it's done a lot of good in paving the way and opening the door, for
Mm-hmm.
witches to be able to start to come out of the broom closet. And then I think as many witches have found, even if they started with Wicca, they go inward and start discovering more and more truths for themselves, and end up expanding beyond um, the rules or structure, we'll say, of Wicca. They want to find more because they feel there's more there
Right.
to be discovered. So, and that's part of what we do, I feel like, is we want to find more. We want to know the more that's there to be discovered, not just accept what's handed to us. We decide for ourselves if this feels right for us, if it doesn't feel right for us, and keep growing, keep pushing, keep discovering what feels right and true. And we encourage all of you to do that for yourself.
right.
You don't
Create
just
your own
stop
magic.
at what you're being told. Do it.
So create your own magic.
Yes. Yes, exactly. Exactly.
And I like that
So,
you say that because, you're able to, look at knowing the background behind Grimoire and Book of Shadows. You're able to look at it and go, well, if you're wanting to be a traditional and you want to go, back as, you want to be as traditional as possible.
mhm,
Well, then maybe you're not going to use the term Book of Shadow. Maybe, and maybe you might not write anything down at all. Maybe you might learn it, and pass it on orally.
mhm.
Whereas if, you're into incorporating and bringing in and, kind of making your own, it doesn't matter what you choose. You can take the terms, you can leave the terms, and really, you know, it's yours. You own it.
Right?
Oh, definitely. There are still several magical traditions that they do not write anything down. It is 100%. You have to be taught, you have to learn it. You learn through working with an individual and practice. And you have to show the person that's teaching you that you are putting in the work and the effort and the dedication, or you don't continue forward with learning because nothing is written down. There is no text to be given to you. And they encourage you to not write stuff down, to keep it. We don't write this down. It is something that we teach. It has to be taught.
Mhm.
So there is that aspect. And then, you have those who want to create a grimoire of their personal magic. So, what are your guys' thoughts on the recording process itself? What do you guys think about writing things down versus not writing things down?
Well, with me, there's a lot of things I don't write down. There's a lot of things, but it is good to write down things, especially if you've gotten to a point where it works.
Right.
And if you are in the mindset of writing it down and, not wanting to hide who you are and what you are and, pass it to your children or pass it to your family, or then I'm all for writing it down, keeping your book of shadows and putting whatever definition you want on that. If you are a witch, and, making that your private journal and whatnot, and working your spells out, working your issues out, and doing your grimoire and passing it on. If you're still in the broom closet and you're scared and you are afraid of what would happen if it got out, then don't write it down.
Right. True. Yeah. That's always an option. If you don't want it discovered, then don't leave it to be discovevered. Don't write records.
If you're not ready for the world to know you're a witch, don't write it down. Because sooner or later, something like that will be found.
Right. Exactly. If you're writing it down, then yes, at some point there is the potential that it could be discovered. So very true. Sister, what are your thoughts?
Okay, so in the leaving your items around where they could be found. Yeah, I have firsthand experience on that. So it's really funny because, while I didn't have a grimoire or a book of shadows, I had, just my books in general. And I kept it all in my closet. It was my personal area, had a whole bookshelf. And when my current husband moved in with me, he told me he was going to clean out my closet because it was kind of a catch-all. He was moving in and, he needed room in there. And so I'm like, don't touch my closet. Don't go in there. Just leave it alone. That's my closet. And I came home from work and everything from my closet was in my bedroom floor where he was going through and organizing everything. And I kind of looked at him. I'm like, so we still together? You still moving in? And he's like, oh, yeah, I'm not going anywhere. So, you never know.
Your broom's still out of the closet.
You really know. Right. It came crashing out the closet door. But I think where I stand on writing things down, because you get onto me all the time. Why aren't you recording your spells? Why aren't you doing that? Why aren't you journaling? Don't you ever write any of your readings down?
I want you to share your take on, what it is you record or don't record and why. And that way we have all different viewpoints here that are being shared and discussed.
So I write nothing down. I write absolutely nothing down. I record nothing. Pretty much I do my spell work and I forget about it. Spells for me tend to be of need or necessity, that are like we've talked about in previous podcasts. A general wish is all it takes. So, right. I mean, to know that it works, I don't need it written down and recorded to know that it works, because I can look at how far I've come from where I was. I have the proof, all around me. When it comes to, oh, maybe I want to do it again. Well, all of my spell work is intuitive. So if it came to me having to remember what I did, most of the time I remember, a lot of the spell work that sister, you and I have done, it may not 100% be exactly the same, but you know that my intentions, I feel like the doing of the work is the intentions, putting the intentions out there. So it's only a fraction of, it's not as important to me as actually having the intention in and of itself. So
Right.
that, and having your brain coming crashing out of the closet, and it does make you a little weary about writing things down. And I mean, when it comes to teaching my kids, I think orally, this is the way I do things. But once again, this is your path. Make it your own. If you want to write down the stuff that, I tell you, or the stuff that you do, that's totally on them, and they can follow their own path.
That was my question as far as like you teaching your kids, the fact that you don't write anything down and you plan to teach just, based on word of mouth, keeping the old traditional way. um, you know, your plan is though to leave it up to them, for them to decide if they want to write it down, if they want to make a grimoire, if they want to keep a book of shadows, or if they want to just learn that way and continue to teach that way.
Right. And like I said, because all of my stuff is based on intuition, and where, one spell worked, in one instance, maybe it's not going to work in the next, because the situation's different. There's different circumstances around why you're doing the magic. So I think
Right.
the magic needs to shift. And I think,
Sure.
I think something the way you had talked about the other day is, so if it's written down, people tend to fall into this rigid, it's got to be done that way. It doesn't leave any room for change or for it to evolve. And magic, it being fluid, I think that it should change and it should evolve.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Always leave room for the change, just like, leaving space for the magic is leaving space for the change, for the possibilities to happen. And I think that applies, it's a really good point. I think it applies even to the spells, whether you're using one that have used before, or you found in a book, or you found online, or that somebody has given you. Definitely making it your own, putting your own intention and following your own intuition and that inner knowledge within of, okay, I think I need to tweak this and I need to change this, or I want to substitute out this particular herb for this other herb. And for people to know that's okay to do, like that's how it works. That's part of the magic, is making it your own. You don't have to follow the spell book,
Right.
word for word, ingredient for ingredient, and even the timing doesn't always have to be exact. I always say the need overrides a moon phase, or what have you. If you've got a true need, do the magic. I mean, that's the most important thing, is do the magic. Don't wait for, well, I need to do this ritual on a Sunday, or I need to do this ritual in this moon phase, or at this hour of the day, or when this planet's in this phase.
Now, if you do get into that mindset, unfortunately, if you are doing a spell that you only believe that you are supposed to be doing on Sunday and you're doing it on a Monday, it's not going to work for you, because you're going against your belief system.
Right.
So, and there, that brings in the doubt, because you're doubting your spell work because you're doing it on the wrong day. And that's why, I've said before, cut the bullshit, do what you want. There is no rules. Don't set rules for you, because the moment you do, that sets your belief system, and it makes it difficult to step outside of it.
Yeah, actually, that's
Right.
a great point, Rose. Absolutely, totally agree. Like, if you get it in your head that if you don't do this spell just so that it's not going to work, it won't. It won't, because you've already implanted that seed into that spell. So it's really, you're right, so much about the mindset, where I keep the mindset of need trumps all, and do the magic, it will
Right.
work. And I stay magically in
See,
that space.
and I guess where I come at, in my practice, I've never paid attention to moon phases. I've never paid attention to days of weeks. Colors don't really matter so much to me. It's, and not having that rigid, everything is assigned something, it really leaves you fluid to do anything you want anytime.
Right.
Right.
Um,
You've got
and
to protect.
using whatever I have on hand, even if it's just my fingers, sometimes those are magical tools.
Oh, yeah,
So, put those to use.
absolutely.
Well, do what you want. If protection is yellow instead of black, then go for it.
Exactly. Exactly. Sister, I know you've
Uh,
said several times before, I don't know if you've said it on a podcast, but you are very much old world traditional in your magic. And a lot of times you approach it as, if I am a little old witch in a cottage in the middle of nowhere, and all I have
I'm a
is
Scottish granny.
Scottish granny, and all I have are a handful of candles, and they are natural beeswax candles, let's say, and all I've got are the herbs that have survived thus far this winter on stock, in hand, and I've got this, that, and the other. You're kind of like, I'm going to take that and I'm going to make a spell out of it.
Yep.
So,
Definitely.
at that point, colors and herbs and oils and all the plants and crystals and all the stuff for you falls out of play.
I've said to
Definitely.
you many times, who says that's what that means?
Right.
Like really, who says that's what that means? Like, who says that's what that stands for?
Right. Right. I mean, really, at the end of the day, I think they're all guidelines. And again, it goes back to, what is your mindset? What do you believe? I mean, if you truly believe that this particular herb has this magical property, and therefore you're using it to boost your intention and to help support the energy of the spell work, then yes, absolutely, that herb is going to do that for you. But if you
Right.
don't believe that that herb is necessary, or that it's not going to do that for you, then it won't. So it really goes back to
Right.
your intention and your desire, and your belief and your mindset.
Right. And going to the herbs, I think that herbs are important. I mean, much of our modern medicine is based on, the knowledge that we have of herbs and the benefits that they have.
Right.
Uh, so, stones, I mean, they all have their properties. They all have their benefits. It's just when it comes to, I see them, I wouldn't say a booster, but just, like an added, if I have it, yeah, I'll use it. If I don't have it,
Right. The
don't
thing that
matter.
I find fascinating about herbs, oils, and crystals, I do want to mention this, is that, across time and cultures where these herbs have been found, and these crystals have been found, and these oils and things have been found, they were used for the common purpose across, all these cultures that at the time had no way of being able to communicate with each other. They had no way
Right.
to call up from, this country, all the way thousands or hundreds of thousands of miles over to another country and say, hey, I'm going to use this amethyst for this. Is that what you're getting on that? Like, is that what you're feeling on that? Like, they had no way of communicating these things. But yet what historians have found is that they used the crystals, the herbs and the oils, they use them all in the same manner. They use them all for the same thing. So there's inherent properties that have been discovered across all these different cultures that this works. This is why they are using these particular items, because they work. And to me, that helps me just put that extra bit of belief into the different items. And yes, it helps lend, in my mind alone anyway, the energy and the benefit of using them. But does that mean if I don't have them on hand that I'm not going to do my spell work? No, I'm still going to do my spell work. I'm going to do what
Right.
needs to be done. I'm going to, again, if I have a need to do magic, I'm going to do the magic, and I'm going to stand firm in the fact that I know my magic is going to work regardless. But yeah, I think it's fascinating if you study these things and you go back and you look at the history, the commonality, where there was no way for them to have communicated the common properties of which they were using these things for. So I definitely think there's a lot of truth in it. But at the end of the day, you got to decide what feels right for you. And you got to do what's right for you. So
Right. And that's not saying that I haven't used them. I have a hagstone hanging on all the entrances to my home, to protect my house. In times like when I was going through my divorce, I carried black obsidian, I carried a snowflake obsidian. I carried different stones for protection. So, I've definitely used them.
yeah.
No, the
But
question there is, do these stones protect on their own, or do they protect because you believe they do, because you were told they do?
and that's a good question. I think going back to the historian side, knowing that all of these things were done throughout history and the commonality was found, I think that really does lend to the credibility behind them. But at the end of the day, I think it's personal belief. And, if you look at a rock or a stone or what have you and say there's nothing there, then to you, there is nothing there. Oh, does that kill you?
Yes, that kills me. You broke my heart just a little bit.
But really,
Sorry.
I'm curious. Like, really, it's
So
you go over and, for say, like with me, I walked into a metaphysical shop, for the first time and selecting rocks, and they tell me, well, this is how you do it. You put this hand over it because this is your receiving hand. Well, maybe it's not my receiving hand. Maybe mine the other one, maybe I did this wrong. But you get told how to do this. So you go along and you're like,
Right.
do, and like, oh, well, did I feel a little something there? Or did I want to feel something there because I'm running my hands over these stones and I'm feeling kind of like an idiot? So, you go along and you pick these stones, and then you don't know what they are. You don't know what the meanings are. And you've got them in your hands, and then you look them up. And then it's like, yeah, of course I need protection. Who doesn't need protection? Well, yeah, of course I need self-love. Who doesn't need self-love? Oh, this brings a little calm in your life. So, I mean, was it the luck of the draw, or,
right.
I had a lot of rhododite come into my life at one point, and it was like, oh, okay, well, I guess I need this right now, because every
Right.
stone I was picking up, it was that type. So
Yeah, so if anybody is interested in the crystals, there is a podcast episode called, I think it's called The Crystal Workshop, that I did. And it gives you a lot of information on crystals, their crystal structure, how the crystals, particular crystals based on their crystalline structure, work with energy, hold energy, transmute energy, yeah, send and receive energy. And so there really is a science behind it as well, which is why I'm so passionate about it. But yeah, I think for me personally, I think based on the scientific structure of the stone itself and how it works with energy, I think there definitely is something very real to the stones. Again, if somebody believes it's just a rock and there's nothing it can do for you, then that's what you're going to create for yourself,
Right.
and you are free to believe that by all means. Like, I am not going to waste time arguing with somebody that doesn't want to believe a crystal helps, because I know they help me, and I'll just say, okay, that's your belief. That's totally fine. And I will go on about my day. But for me, they're very real and they do work. And when you work with them and ask them, once you find out, okay, what can this stone do, right? Like, what's been documented that this stone can do? And then you ask and set that intention with that stone to help you work with you. Yeah, like, it will help you. When I was going through my divorce, my sister gave me a snowflake obsidian, and I kept it on me all the time and did not notice until one day, after months of keeping this thing in my pocket with nothing else, by itself, all alone in my pocket every single day, she asked to see the stone. And I was like, oh, yeah, sure. So I pull it out of my pocket, and it was pitted. It looked like
So bad.
somebody had taken, just like an ice pick to it and just chipped and chipped and chipped and chipped and chipped away at it. It was pitted almost to pieces. And it was taking hit after hit after hit after hit for me. I believe that to be true. I believe I got out of and away from a lot of really crappy things that could have gone on because that stone stayed with me and was taking the hit. And I've not seen a stone act like that before. I really haven't. The amount of work that it did for me, I thanked it. Oh, I very much so thanked it for the work that it did and how hard it worked for me, because I do appreciate, all the protection that it was giving me. But like I said, it
I
was
think
alone in my pocket. It's not like there was something else in there knocking it. I didn't have a clear quartz or a diamond or a Herkimer diamond or something harder than it. There was nothing else in there that could have been knocking and causing these pits. So, I mean, and I could go on and on and on. You guys know I love crystals, so I could go on and on with stories about crystals. But if somebody chooses to
well, I
believe that
think
they do nothing, that you have every right to believe that.
Right.
Absolutely.
I think that when it comes to that stone, I think it should be noted that that was the same rock that I carried. That was the same stone that I had carried through my divorce. And
Oh,
I carried it in my pocket with other stones. And, I had it for, I don't know, over 10 years, probably 13 years before I gave it to you.
and it was in mint condition.
So it was in mint condition
It
when
really
I gave
was.
that stone to you. And that's why when you pulled it out of your
Sure.
pocket and I saw how damaged it was, what'd you do? What the heck? I think this
I didn't
belongs
do
to you now.
it. Oh my gosh. No, I didn't do it. I mean, I guess I did it, but I didn't do it. The stone worked very hard for me.
Right.
I didn't realize you had it that long and that you had used it for like the same
Yep.
purpose, and you had other rocks in there with it, but it never took on any of that kind of damage.
Mhm. I was going to say
No.
there is a belief that if you wear a stone for a particular reason, which a lot of people will wear stones for protection and whatnot, that there's a belief that when they break, they've finally served their purpose, or they took
Yes.
a really big hit and saved you from it.
Yeah. Oh
So,
yeah. Yeah. And in that situation, I think it's best to thank it and bless it and return it to the earth.
right.
And give it like a little burial ceremony and really thank it. At least that's what I would do.
Right. Thank you for your service.
Yes, you are very loved and appreciated. You will not be forgotten. And obviously, this one was not, because here we are talking about it again. So he will never be forgotten. He is much appreciated. All right, you guys. So, any last thoughts on Grimoire Books and Shadows? I have a couple other things I wanted to, some my personal thoughts, but did you guys have anything else to add?
No, let's hear your personal thoughts.
Okay. So, I, of course, am an advocate for writing everything down. It's very important to me. I like to think of a grimoire as, like we said before, a textbook of magical knowledge and information. And I do plan on, I am actually working on building my grimoire, which I will pass down to my daughter. And I wanted to have things like correspondences, um, general knowledge, whether that be the directions, the elements, the moon phases, things on numbers, colors, candle magic, just lots of the general basic information, right? And some of the most important stones and crystals to me, because there are textbooks upon textbooks of herbs and crystals and oils, and it can go on and on and on. But the ones that mean the most to me, that I use the most, I would want in there for her to have, as well as spells that I have done that I know work, that I have tested and tried out, and they have been successful for me. I would want those in my grimoire for her to be passed down. However, I do also believe in keeping a book of shadows, being that it is just that, your book of shadows, where it is your working magical journal. It's you working through your shadows. It's you working through your spell work. It's you taking essentially the scientific method and applying it to your spell work of, I did this on this day at this time, this moon phase. I used these ingredients. This was the intention. These were the tools, and really recording everything. And then also going behind that and following up with what were the results. And can I tweak this? Can I change ingredients? Should I change the intention? Could I change the timing? And behind that, with the intention piece, is where I put my personal feelings and my personal thoughts and intention into it, so I know what I'm doing. But then once I have found a spell that works, then I transfer just the spell, not all the inner and outer workings of it, to my grimoire, along with basic information of what this spell is used for, so that she would know when or when not to use this spell. And then going back to that teaching and that knowledge piece and word of mouth, going through and saying, okay, this particular spell is used in this situation with this intention. However, if you need to tweak it, change it, please do so, and have her record it in her book of shadows. So then she might even come up with a spell that I have in my grimoire by taking it, changing it, tweaking it, come up with her own spell that she then wants to add to our grimoire and keep building upon. So that's kind of how I look at the two. So my grimoire is something that I want to build of the textbook, the knowledge that can be passed down and added to. But my book of shadows is all my inner workings of me and myself and my spiritual and magical evolvement and growth. My magical workings, even my card readings, I want to put in there, and I record and follow up on, and all of my successes, all of my magical failures that need to be tweaked and tried again. But no, I think at the end of the day, my book of shadows is something that I would probably want burned. When I am no longer around, my book of shadows need not be found.
Right.
So,
what about if it's buried with you?
I'd be okay with that. It could be buried or cremated with me, either one. I'm fine with that. But yeah, no, I would not want that to be discovered, because it's your inner workings. And not that there's anything, to be ashamed of. There's just some things that maybe I don't want my kid knowing what I went through. I'm giving her all the tools she needs in her grimoire. She don't have to know all the down and dirties of why some things came to be, sort of say.
Right.
So that's my take on it. So I am a huge advocate of journaling and keeping a book of shadows, and also work on building your grimoire. and make it fun. Keep it magical. Keep it light. Let it be something you want to do. Let it be the
Right.
follow-up piece of your magic. It doesn't have to be a tedious chore. I enjoy doing a good spell work and following it up with a reading and then journaling on, what I did, recording my spell, what my reading said would come about from the spell, and then seeing what happens. And then I come back with the follow-up of, okay, this took a day, or it took a week, or it took a month. It took years, but here we are. I got the results. So that is my final thoughts. I hope that we have given everybody something to think about. Definitely make it your own and do what feels right for you, whether that be keeping it all word of mouth, having a grimoire, not having one, Book of Shadows, or not. Totally up to you.
Passing it on, keeping it to yourself.
Right.
Turning it into a color book, whatever you want.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah, because anymore there are like so many things out there, so many different grimoires and spell books, and all those things are out there. I think they're a great starting point. It's something that if you're interested in kind of getting a feel for, okay, what is this all about? What does a grimoire look like? What does a spell book look like? And trying to just give yourself some idea or structure. Sure, go out there, discover, check some stuff out, see what feels right to you, see if you like what you're finding or not, and then make your own out of it. For sure.
Right.
Play around with it.
Templates out there.
Yeah. I mean, you can make a scrapbooking is your thing. Make it a scrapbook. There's nothing that says you can't do that.
Like quilting, do quilting.
That would be cool, actually.
Right?
Have a quilted grimoire. That would be pretty freaking cool.
Uh-oh, light bulb going off. I can see the wheel a turning.
Yeah, I know you've got me thinking, because it is pretty a cool idea, actually. I'm totally over here spinning my wheels. Yep. Oh boy. I kind of like it. All right, you guys. I think that's it for us, unless anybody else wants to add anything.
No.
No. So where can people find us?
Oh, yeah. Fun stuff. All right, you guys. So don't forget, we appreciate it if you like, follow, and share. We are on Facebook, The Witch Source. You can get in the Facebook group, which is a great place to be, The Witch Source Society. It's a great place to find community, ask questions, get support. We are in there. We do read your questions, your comments, and we love to offer advice, help, support on anything you might need. We're also on YouTube, so if you can subscribe there, you can find when we go live. You can find spells on there. You can find podcast episodes, lots of good things. We would love it if you would subscribe there. We're on Instagram. We're also on Pinterest. You can check us out and shop the witchy wares and magical supplies on thewitchsource.com. You can also get readings there and check out what we have to offer. And let's see. The podcast, of course, if you're listening, wherever you're listening right now, make sure you hit subscribe. And if you like it, please leave us a review. And if you could, we would love it if you would share, especially if you think somebody would enjoy it as well. I think that covers everything. Did I miss anything?
I think you got it all.
All right, good. All right, you guys, we hope you've enjoyed it, and we hope that you have a fabulous rest of your week and that you stay magical, and we will see you guys next time.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.